Hey there, Washington, D.C.'s anti-China policy is ramping up. Donald Trump certainly made U.S. China policy dumber and more aggressive, but that was more of a shift in tone than it was a shift in direction. The U.S. military-industrial complex has wanted a new Cold War with China for over 3 decades now. Joe Biden was just elected president, promising to be even tougher on China than Donald Trump was. Well, there's just one problem here. Last week, Europe, our main ally in the last Cold War, just made it pretty clear that they're not particularly interested in a new one. Europe and China have been working on the Comprehensive Agreement on Investment, or CAI, since 2013. 8 years ago, Washington, D.C. was still mostly in its build China up until it looks like a credible enemy phase. Things are obviously a little different now. The U.S. government is eager to start this Cold War it has been investing in for 30 years. Yet Europe, or perhaps it's more accurate to say Germany and France, just accelerated the process on this trade deal with China, intentionally finalizing negotiations before Biden could get into office and start working on repairing transatlantic friendship. What's happening here is that the EU is sending the United States a very clear message. Some analysts are acting like this is a done deal, but they're not reading the fine print. There is still technical language to get sorted out, and there are at least a couple more layers of approval to go through in the EU system. There are probably years of hoops to jump through before this thing comes into effect. At any point along the way, the agreement can be blown up entirely, or it can become so watered down as to become meaningless. What Europe has done here is give itself leverage against the United States. Europe's countries have locked themselves into a process that can be accelerated or delayed, based on whether or not the United States starts treating them like independent countries again. Many are outraged by this. How dare they? What about those Uyghurs in Xinjiang? What is happening in Xinjiang is horrible. But the United States has begun to treat all of Europe like its own personal Xinjiang. It would be one thing if we really were focused on China, but Washington, D.C. is now trying to control European foreign policy in every direction. We are slowly smothering European independence, and we aren't even consistent in our demands from one U.S. president to the next. Since 2018, we haven't allowed them to do business with Iran, even though the last U.S. president designed a deal specifically for that. Europeans apparently aren't allowed to build natural gas pipelines to Russia anymore either, a supposed national security move that's really about forcing our European colonies to buy U.S. gas. And now we don't want them buying stuff from China either, after we spent at least 3 decades encouraging exactly that. This is not just a Trump thing. He made it louder and dumber with his insulting trade and sanctions policy, but there has been a steady growth in U.S. coercion behind the scenes for decades now. This accelerated after 9/11, as I pointed out in a video I made on Iran sanctions a couple years back. The Patriot Act and a range of other U.S., European, and international legislation dramatically stepped up the invasiveness and power of financial compliance laws. Strangely, as we learned in Syria, this never really did much to slow down the funding of terrorism, but it made OFAC and other U.S. agencies a lot more powerful. 9/11 supercharged national security freaks everywhere and dramatically widened the government's picture of what is going on, financially speaking. Power tends to accumulate, and Washington, D.C.'s powers have already spread far beyond counterterrorism. 2010's FATCA, the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, turned the IRS into a sort of supercharged OFAC. Other doctrines and agencies, like the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act and the Department of Justice, have been dusted off and employed to make the U.S. ever more powerful, reaching ridiculous heights like the arrest of a Chinese businesswoman in Canada a couple months back. This is the real Thucydides trap. Like ancient Athens, the United States built a successful alliance that served its purpose. Yet it still exists, and it's becoming steadily more brutal, both towards its enemies and to its allies. Most fundamentally, what this is about is self-respect. The West loves to claim that Asian countries have some weird obsession with honor, but we have got the exact same thing. My bet is that Europe's current incarnation is content to fall further into dependence on the United States. But they don't like having their noses rubbed in it. Trump didn't really have a new U.S. policy, but he let the mask slip too far. By making U.S. power too obvious, he made that U.S. power weaker. The Europe-China CAI should be a wake-up call. Is the United States really interested in building a coalition of true allies for strategic competition against China? Or are we demanding that everybody in the world join with us against an ever-growing list of official enemies as U.S. subjects? I'm not yet convinced that either of these choices are really necessary, but the first one could provide the competition that would allow for human flourishing across the next century. The second option will lead to World War III by 2040 and the possible extinction of the human race. Donald Trump was very much about door number 2. Let's hope that Joe Biden and his people have a little more sense. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe. And if you want a free essay on a completely different topic, I suggest you sign up for my email newsletter at the link here. I intend to do a lot more with it in the new year. Thanks.